Oh, there's a lot to put away, isn't there? Before I start, I think we should express a thank you to David and Debbie and all of our musicians for all the hard work they have been doing this season. These folks, while the rest of us are getting ready for Christmas, these folks are getting ready for Christmas for us, and we really appreciate their ministry. Thank you for that song, David. Well, I don't know about you, but every year after Christmas, when I start to put away all the decorations, not yet, not today, but later this week, I begin to wonder, what was it we just did? It went so fast. It came, we did it, we had this Christmas event, or this celebration, and what was it that we just celebrated really? How does his story of December 25th connect with my story and your story on December 26th and the other 364 days a year? Well, most of our favorite stories have a familiar pattern, don't they? They begin with a pain, a heartache, or a heartbreak. And many of our favorite stories begin with someone who doesn't have enough love in their life, someone who's separated from people who love them and who's trying very hard to get to those people. Well, for example, how many of you have seen the animated movie, Finding Nemo? Anybody seen that movie? That is one of my favorite movies. It's about a little clownfish named Nemo who becomes separated from his dad in the ocean. And they're separated. In fact, poor Nemo, he is captured and placed in an aquarium in a dentist's office in Sydney, Australia. And the story is how Nemo and his dad have to fight their way to come back together to where love is, to get back to where they need to be. Or the movie Toy Story about Woody, the little cowboy, who becomes separated from the child that loves him, and his life is purposeless. He's got to find that child. Or Peter Pan. I like Peter Pan. They often do that at this time of year. Peter lives in a place called Never Never Land, which is not a happy place for little boys. Little boys live in Neverland, not little girls. You know why? Because little boys, as babies, they fell out of their carriages. And he tells us that little girls are way too clever to fall out of their carriages. So Neverland is occupied by little boys who are very sad because there are three things they don't have there. They don't have pockets. I mean, what's a little boy without pockets, For picking up the sticks and the rocks and all the things that little boys like to take home. Secondly, they don't have stories. There are no stories. They never get to hear a happy ending. And there are no mothers. Well, it's even worse. There's no one to read the stories to them. Another favorite around this time of year is Annie. Remember Annie? This story began as a comic strip in the 1930s about a little orphan girl in New York City. And it became the first musical to earn over $100 million on Broadway. It was very popular. In fact, at one time it was the longest-running musical on Broadway. And Annie lives in an orphanage and prays every day that her parents will come and find her. And she sings, maybe now this prayer is the last one of its kind. And it's hard not to feel something with her. And she hopes against hope that her parents will be there in the morning. Or Oliver, based on the book Oliver Twist by Dickens. This has been produced in at least 14 different movie and stage versions. And the movie won 7 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. Oliver is a little boy living in an orphanage in London. And it's hard not to feel something for him when he sings, every night I kneel and pray, let tomorrow be the day. All he wants is a mom. It's pretty simple. And when we see him, we want him to have that too. We see these stories and they're heartwarming. We like them because they have happy endings. But they begin with a character who's separated from the love they need. Now, the Christmas story is on a very similar pattern, really. The characters that are separated from the love they need in the Christmas story are the human race, and you and I. And for hundreds and hundreds of years, they've been separated, and the promise was given that there would be a Messiah born, a Savior, God with us. But since Malachi finished writing the last book of the Old Testament, there had been nothing but silence. And people prayed, and people waited, and people looked, and the faithful called out to God to fulfill his promise. Malachi, 400 years of silence, and then a whisper was heard at Christmas night when the shepherds heard the angels tell them that it had finally happened. And hundreds of miles away, these wise men, God enabled them to see and to read in the stars and to understand that the Messiah had been born. It's thought that the reason that those wise men knew about this promise is because hundreds of years earlier, perhaps 600 years earlier, Daniel had been there. Daniel, you remember, he was an advisor to the king in that foreign land, and it's probably because of his teaching that they knew of this promise of this Messiah who would come and who would be God with us and who would take care of that separation problem that you and I have. Well, people have loved the Christmas story for hundreds and hundreds of years since then and have clung to it. Why does it touch us so deeply? Why do we need it? Well, we're going to try to understand this morning in 3 acts, 3 sections. And first, we'll try to understand the situation behind Christmas. This is Act 1. The Scriptures teach us many things about God. We talk often here about the attributes of God, that God is holy above all things, and He is love, He is merciful, He is faithful, and all these attributes and many more. A great book that if you haven't read it, get it this holiday season and read it. It's called Knowing God by J.I. Packer. He goes through a number of the attributes of God and how we see them in Scripture. But a couple of big words that we often don't talk about that are a little different than attributes, but they cut across all of the attributes of God. And they are transcendence, and I have the arrow going up, and immanence going down. And I'll try and define these big words. They're really not that complicated. The first one, transcendence, let's go ahead to the next slide. Transcendence means that God is far beyond mankind and His creation. He is so high above us and so far beyond us that man can never hope to reach God on our own effort. God is transcendent. He is very big and very powerful. The next slide, Psalm 19 says, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows His handiwork. Day unto day utters speech, and night unto night reveals knowledge. There is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard." The stars, the creation, were designed to tell us in no uncertain terms that God exists, that He is there. There's your galaxy. Actually, this is a picture of a galaxy far, far away, and probably long, long ago, but a galaxy that scientists believe is about the same size as ours, and you are here. You can find your planet there someplace. Galaxies are so huge. This one is approximately 120,000 light years across. That means that if you could fly at the speed of light, which at that speed you could circle the Earth about 7 times a second, if you had begun from one end of our galaxy to try to travel to the other end at the beginning of recorded time when man began to write down his story, you would only be maybe 1/10 of the way across our galaxy at this time, flying at that tremendous speed. The galaxy, the stars were designed to tell us that there is someone very big, very powerful behind the universe and behind us, someone transcendent. The next word, immanence. Immanence means that God is very close. He is everywhere. He sustains His creation and our very breath. God is immanent. Acts 18:27. Paul is talking to a pagan king and explaining the Christian faith, and he says to him, "He is not very far from any one of us. In fact, in Him we live and move and have our being." And Job said this. He said, "If He should take back His spirit to Himself and gather to Himself His breath, all flesh would perish together and man would return to the dust." We are dependent on Him for our very breath. He is immanent. He is right here. So God is both transcendent and immanent. But there is a problem. There is a problem, and that is that we're separated from God. Isaiah said it this way, "Your iniquities have made a separation between you and your God, and your sins have hid His face from you so that He does not hear." We're separated from God. In fact, when mankind sinned, we placed ourselves out of alignment with both His transcendence and His immanence. Because the appropriate response when we see the stars, when we see His greatness, is to fall to our knees and humbly say, "Lord, I am glad that You are transcendent, that You're powerful enough to hold the universe together, and I don't have to. And that You are the creator and I'm the creature, and not the other way around." And the appropriate response to God's immanence is to say, "Lord, I am so glad. I thank You for my breath. I thank you for every moment of life that you give me, and I thank you that you're here, and I want to live my life with my soul, my person, my attitudes in alignment with you also, so that you're not only immanent in the physical sense, but immanent spiritually in my life. I want to be in line with you. And this brings us back to those favorite stories that we have at this time of year. We're separated from God. He's the one that we need above all because He's where the love is. And we feel this separation very acutely at times in our lives. At other times, we're able to kind of cover it up. We like to act tough. I don't need love. But we all feel it at many times. And sometimes when we watch these stories where we see someone else who's hurting and going through that separation, we feel it ourselves just a little bit. And we feel a sense of the brokenness that we have and that longing for the reunion and the love that we were meant to enjoy in Christ. Each of these stories has a problem that ultimately traces back to our separation. So I'd like to invite you into my living room for a few minutes, and I'm going to ask my daughter Carissa to come up and sing a couple of these songs that these characters sing in their stories. Come on up, hon. I told her she wouldn't be nervous. When you're 13, it's a little bit scary. So the first character, Annie, she lives in the Hudson Street School for Girls in New York City. And it's hard not to feel something for her when she stands there alone in the middle of the night, mopping the floor. This orphanage is run by Miss Hannigan, an alcoholic, abusive woman who takes all the money the government gives her for the kids and spends it on herself and her sleazy friends. And this orphanage, Annie, for her wishful thinking, is punished by, she has to mop the floor in the middle of the night. And then she sings this song, Maybe. So Annie is praying for her parents to come home, to come find her, hoping against hope. Oliver is an orphan in London, and Oliver, he lives in an orphanage as well. And one night, you may remember, he has the audacity to ask for one more bowl of gruel. Now, I don't know why anyone would eat gruel, but I guess in London it was quite popular back in the 1800s. And Oliver, for that crime, is sold to an undertaker. And his job is to walk behind funeral processions looking sad, because he's the sad-looking boy. He is sad. And so one night, locked in the undertaker's extra room, he sings this song called Where Is Love?
Where
So why do we like to watch orphans who are separated from love and suffering and wishing and praying and hoping? Well, it's because deep down inside of us, we are separated too. Deep inside of us, we know we have that need for love. And our separation is not because we've lost our parents, but it's because of the sin in our lives, each one of us. The solution, God with us, Act 2. As I said, those story characters that we connect with, they touch something deep inside of us. And there are many human pains that trace back to that separation problem with God. And there are many human solutions, too. We see them in the different stories. You remember The Wizard of Oz. Dorothy lives in Kansas, a very drab place, very flat. And she wishes she could be in a place where it was a little easier on little girls and their dogs, a place that was more accepting of Toto, and a place maybe that was color instead of black and white. You'll remember that movie starts off in black and white. And her solution is kind of the scared straight solution because she gets to go to that place, to go to Oz, and it's colorful, but that charm wears off and she finds out that it's really quite a scary place. But luckily those ruby shoes, she gets to go back. And she's happy to be back in Kansas in that house that seems to have no windows and no foundation. It's okay for Dorothy. Or Annie, her solution is to be adopted by Daddy Warbucks. He has plenty of money, and she never has to worry again in her life. She has plenty of love. Everybody adores her. It's Christmas at the end of the show, and it's just a great, happy ending. Or Nemo. This is the character development solution. Nemo and his dad. Nemo has to fight his way out of that aquarium and cross an 8-lane freeway to get back in the ocean so his dad can find him. And his dad has to fight his way through shark-infested, mine-infested waters to get to where Nemo is. And they both dig deep down inside, and they learn that they have way more resources than they ever thought they did, and they develop character, and they go on to live powerful lives on the speaking circuit. Or Peter Pan, his solution is, I'll never grow up. Remember that song, I Won't Grow Up? And that doesn't work very well either. Peter says, it's just way too scary out in the real world. I won't grow up. Those are some human solutions, and maybe you've got a few of your own. We're all trying some of them from time to time. But what's God's solution? Well, his solution was Christmas. His solution was the incarnation. For hundreds of years they had waited, and then he came and fulfilled this prophecy in Isaiah. The Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will be with child and will give birth to a son, and will call him Emmanuel. And on the next slide, we see that it was prophesied in Isaiah as well, in Isaiah 9, that this Messiah would come. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulder, and his name will be called, look at these names, Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Now what's interesting in this story of Christmas, when we think about the transcendence of God and the immanence of God, is that the story of Christmas brings together both of those features of God in this amazing little package we call Christmas. Look at the prophecy. I've underlined, let's go back. I've underlined the words, some of these words refer to the transcendence of God, and some of them focus on his immanence, his closeness. Wonderful Counselor. Wonderful means he's transcendent. He's amazing. He's good. Counselor. That's a very close term. Mighty God. That's transcendence. Everlasting. That's transcendent. Father. That's a close, personal term. Prince. That's a transcendent thing. Not many of us are princes. Prince of Peace. That's an imminent thing. So on the next slide, when we read then the story in the book of Matthew or the book of Luke, that we see both the immanence and transcendence of God highlighted in that story, and they're brought into this contrast. And I'd encourage you this afternoon or later this week to read through the Christmas story in the book of Luke maybe or Matthew and look for things that highlight God's transcendence, his power, his glory, and aspects of the story that highlight his closeness. Look on the left side. There was the brightest star. This star was the brightest star they'd ever seen, and it was evidently out long enough that the wise men, who it probably took them like a year and a half to get there, but they saw in the stars this evidence that the Son, the Messiah, had been born, and they came, and then they went to Jerusalem, and then when they left Jerusalem, knowing that they had to go to Bethlehem, then the star they saw standing over the place where they would go. Another aspect of the transcendence that I didn't list here is that Jesus in his life and his birth fulfilled some 120 distinct prophecies about the Son of God. And you could find those in a book called Evidence That Demands a Verdict. That's a transcendent. Imagine how much power it takes to predict hundreds of years in advance what would happen in this person named Jesus Christ, and then for that to be fulfilled in his life. The angels. We're told that when the angels came, I like it, the shepherds were out in the field, and they got to see first, right? They heard from the angels. But angels are very bright and evidently very frightening for people. I guess I would probably be pretty scared. And so God had just one angel appear first to the shepherds, because otherwise they probably would have dropped dead or run for their lives. And what did that first angel say? Don't be afraid. Yeah, I know I'm bright. I know you're covering your eyes, but I'm just a reflection of God's glory. And then the other angels could appear. Don't be afraid. Okay, there's going to be a bunch of angels. Poof, and then the night is just light, and there's this star, and it's got to be pretty amazing. That's the transcendence of God. He was recognized as a king from hundreds of miles away, that there would be this he was the king, he was born. The royalty, the wise men that came to visit, and then Herod loses it. The wise men come and they say, where's the baby that was born, the new king of the Jews? And Herod, he's the appointed king from Rome that's sitting over this area, and he's terrified. He is absolutely terrified. In fact, it says the whole city of Jerusalem was troubled to hear this news that they hadn't heard. Now, the immanence of God shows up in the story as well, in that, first off, that here is the transcendent God of the universe born as a baby. Babies are little. They're not very intimidating, unless you're like a new dad. But they're not very intimidating, really. They're small, they're helpless, they need care, they have to be held, they wiggle, they make noises. He was born in a manger. That's a barn, basically, or a little lean-to. He was born with sheep. Can't get any closer to the earth than that. He was called a shepherd himself, and the shepherds were the first to be told. That's a lowly career. And he was called Emmanuel, God with us, and many other aspects of the story that you'll see highlight both the transcendence and power of God and the immanence of God, and bring them into this release, or into this contrast. He came as a baby to say to us, don't be afraid. I'm approachable. The separation problem will be dealt with. The Father in heaven said, who will go? And the Son stood and said, I will go. I will pay the price. I will make the difference. Transcendence and immanence. So what began as a whisper of fulfilled prophecy among the shepherds surrounding Jerusalem burst out into this display of light and fulfilled prophecy and miraculous events, and then settled back into quiet worship of Emmanuel. And the band is going to come and lead us in worship of that Emmanuel. Thanks, Rich. Thank you. Well, this brings us to Act 3 of God's solution. Not just God with us, but God with me. It's great that God provided a solution for the world, Emmanuel, God with us. But what about God with you and God with me? What about us personally? It doesn't help Annie or Oliver to hear that Congress has allocated special funds to take care of children. Now, they're praying for a real mom, a real dad, a real answer, a real solution to that separation. And so are you and I. There comes a time in each of our lives when that Christmas event, that birth of the baby, has to happen in us. We see it in our Christmas carols. I think the next slide shows a little town of Bethlehem, the verse we often don't sing. How silently the wondrous gift is given. So God imparts to human hearts the blessings of his heaven. No ear may hear his coming, but in this world of sin, where meek souls will receive him still, the dear Christ enters in. And that is when the Christmas event happens in you and I. Because he wants not just to be imminent in the creation and imminent around us, but imminent in our soul and our spirit, in our lives. The Bible calls this being born again from above when he enters in, and we see it all over the Christmas carols and the songs. I've asked Debbie to come and read a story for us that shows how this happened many, many years ago for an old man who was very hardened and very resistant, very closed to the idea of Christmas. It's a true story written many years ago by a woman named Thera Bjorn. She's a Swedish woman whose father was a pastor in Sweden back in the 1910s, 1920s, and then in Massachusetts later. And this story tells an experience that she had as a little girl. It's a little bit old-fashioned, but I think it will speak to us.
I remember Christmases of long ago when we were children and Papa and Mama were our whole world. It is good to remember the peace there was and the stillness and calm as Christmas approached. Mama was busy preparing little remembrances for otherwise forgotten people in the community. A box of cookies here, a coffee ring there, a little plant to someone in the hospital. Little gifts over and above her budget, but gifts from our household to the Christ child. For the recently orphaned little girl living with unwilling relatives, Mama had a coloring book and some cookies from her Christmas baking. A loaf of rye bread went to our next-door neighbors. Yes, Mama sent us children all over the village with Christmas cheer. But there was one particular Christmas I'll never forget when Mama sent me on a strange mission. In a shack at the edge of the village, there lived an ugly old recluse. He was a strange man with a badly disfigured face, and he seemed to hate children. There were all kinds of rumors about him. Some people said he was rich and hoarded his money, having sacks of it hidden away. But it was just gossip. No one knew for sure. Anyway, everyone was afraid of him, and we children, we tried to avoid walking near his place. But this Christmas Eve, Mama had been thinking about him. It is Christmas for him too, she said, and we must make a little treat for him. I want you to go and knock on his door and give him this bundle and wish him a Merry Christmas. But I'm afraid of him, Mama, I said. You need never be afraid when you go in the name of love, carrying good tidings on a Christmas Eve, said Mama with a smile. I took the bundle, surprised that it felt warm. I looked questioningly at Mama. It is a chicken I cooked for him, Mama informed me, and some little things to go with it. Be careful not to tip it. I started off through the snow, thinking how brave I was visiting this man who always chased children away. But inside, I trembled a little. Well, I thought, if he is mean, I can just leave the bundle and run. It certainly did not look like Christmas around his shack. But I knocked on the door and waited, clasping my bundle close to me. Then I heard dragging feet coming toward the door, and it was open just a crack. "What do you want?" the old man barked. "Mama sent me to bring you some Christmas cheer. This is a gift for you." Slowly the door opened wide. "Come in," he said. I stepped inside, keeping close to the door, looking around the room. It was the messiest room I had ever seen, and it was so cold and dark. "I am the pastor's little girl," I said. "I want to wish you a Merry Christmas." "What have you got in that bundle?" "A chicken and then things." He took the bundle and unwrapped it. Then his eyes grew big and round. "Is this all for me?" "Yes," I cleared my voice. "It is to remind you of the Christ child." He wiped his nose and blew it hard. It was hard to tell for sure, but I thought I saw a tear rolling down that ugly face. "Sit down," he said kindly. I sat down on the chair by the table. "Say thank you to your mama, and I will thank the Christ child myself," he said. The chicken smelled so good in that tiny kitchen, littered with papers and cans, that I became a little bolder. "May I straighten up your place a little to make it look more like Christmas?" I asked him, because suddenly I wasn't afraid of him anymore. I just felt sorry that he was so alone. He nodded, and I picked up what I could and wiped the table and tried to fix the food Mama had sent so it looked nice. He did not look mean anymore. He looked almost nice. Then a thought came to my mind. "Would you like to come home with me to have Christmas with us?" I asked. He shook his head. "No, I'd like to stay here in my own world. But this is the first time anyone ever gave me anything. It will be a good Christmas Eve." I began to get ready to leave, still feeling sorry he was alone. But he held me back. "Stay a minute," he said. "I'd like to share a Christmas story with you." I sat down on a chair, and he sat down beside me. "Can I read the Christmas story for you?" I asked, picking up his dusty old Bible. "No, thank you, little girl. I'll tell you a Christmas story now, and later tonight I'll read the story of the first Christmas myself." His eyes were shining now, and his scarred face was almost handsome. "Once I had a little girl like you," he said slowly, looking out the window off into the distance. "I had a nice home and a wife, too. Then one Christmas Eve, my little girl wanted to light the candles on our Christmas tree. I never should have let her, but she pleaded so that I gave in. She dropped the match, and the tree went up in flames, and so did our home. My wife and little girl were so badly burned that they did not live to see another year. As you can see, I myself was burned. I wanted to die too, but I lived. So I moved away from there. I bought this old place and I became a recluse, working just enough to buy food. I hated life and everybody and God, and most of all, Christmas. Many years have gone by now, but no one ever befriended me like you did until tonight. You came almost like my little daughter, and it was Christmas Eve." He stopped suddenly, blowing his nose again. I went over and I put my arms around him. "This hug is from your little girl up in heaven," I said. What a strange Christmas Eve that was as I sat at my house with our family. I felt that I had so much. That next week, Papa and Mama went to see that old man. By the time the new year had come, he had left this earth. He was a different man those last days because Christmas had touched his heart with love. A silver key could not have opened this man's heart, but the pure gold of love did, and all because Mama gave her gifts to the Christ child. Let us not forget to remember those who need love this time of year, for that is the only true way of celebrating Christmas.
Days ago, I was flying home from a meeting in Washington, D.C., and I sat on the airplane next to a 29-year-old woman who had just recently completed treatment for cancer. She had been diagnosed with cancer just 2 years earlier, and now she was done, and she had gone through this. And she was flying to Seattle for the first time to meet her fiance's parents for the first time. She had met her fiance in the doctor's office because he too had cancer, was being treated. And she said, I'm really nervous because I've never done anything like this. He had encouraged her to fly out. She said, he doesn't know I'm coming because I hadn't decided. And just today I bought the tickets. So I asked her, are you a different person because of what you've gone through? And she kind of teared up. She says, yeah, you wouldn't believe how much this changed me. In fact, she said, if I had a choice to go through the last 2 years without cancer than to go through it with cancer, I'd choose to do it again because it changed me. She said, before I was a workaholic, I just kept putting life off. I would never have taken a risk to buy a ticket, get on an airplane, fly out like this. I would have just put it off, put it off, put it off. And the nice thing about those Christmas stories we like to hear is they have a happy ending. And of course, the Christmas story has a happy ending too in our hearts as Christ comes into our hearts. And maybe tonight, I don't know where you're at, maybe you start a relationship with Christ, maybe you need to restart one. I encourage you to take the risk.